Greetings, it's your host, Gabe Morales. In order to understand the growth of Texas prison gangs, one must go back to an incident in 1972, whereby prisoners at the Eastham Unit filed a class action lawsuit against the Texas Department of Corrections director, as the Texas Department of Criminal Justice was known at that time, and the inmates won. In 1979, the courts found that conditions within the Texas corrections system constituted cruel and unusual punishment in violation of the U.S. Constitution. While there are many names included in the lawsuit, David Ruiz was the first name listed, and that is how the case was titled and how it became known from then on. The case was adjudicated in 1980, which dismantled the old tier tender and inmate boss system. In the vacuum of these changes, groups of inmates formed cliques, which developed into prison gangs. The first documented one was the Texas Syndicate, which was actually born in the late 1960s to early 70s in the California Department of Corrections. They established a tip of their own, known as the Texas Syndicate. The official logo or copia was drawn up that greatly resembled the East Gate at Folsom Prison, with a T superimposed on an S. Today, a Texas Syndicate specific tattoo is no longer required, or it may be camouflage due to easy ID by officials. I don't have time to get in all the movidas of the TS and Califas, and will try not to repeat too much information already included in previous videos on Texas prison gangs. I will focus on any corrections from those videos or any clarifications or recent updates. TDCJ first began to see TS members coming into their system around 1975 to 76, but officials did not realize what they were dealing with at the time, which helped the convicts that are involved in the TS multiply, and they established themselves in the system by taking a divide and conquer approach. Keep in mind, at that time, in the mid-70s, the building tier tender system was still in place, but once the TS got strong enough, they proceeded to control the tenders and convince them not to mess around with their prison gang, which further established their reputation and control. There were numerous assaults and several murders that took place between 1975 and 1983 that were never tied to the TS because, like I said before, nobody in the department was even monitoring them in that capacity. In 1983, the agency finally began to realize the problem was not going away, and they discovered by backtracking that many of the assaults taking place in the system during those years were directly related to the Texas Syndicate. According to former TDCJ employee and security threat group expert Marianne Denner, the TS grew rapidly in the Texas Department of Corrections after the lawsuit, and in Texas there were 12 original members. These individuals were mainly Hispanic, but also some white inmates who joined together for protection against others and to control the system.
And Marianne helped me out a lot, especially on that Texas Syndicate. Appreciate that again for making sure, I was straight, because I don't like to put out misinformation, and there is a lot of misinformation out there. So
between 1980 and 1983, the TS was responsible for at least 4 homicides and numerous assaults. Between 1984 and 1985, there were 52 documented gang-related homicides, many attributed to the Texas Syndicate in their war with the Mexikanemi, Texas Mexican Mafia. In 1992, the TS finally signed a peace treaty with the Mexikanemi, which created a split in the organization. As many of you know, that the Texas Mexican Mafia has a stronghold in the city of San Antonio. But in the early days, the TS also had some soldiers there. The TS still has some numbers in Houston, in particular the Barrio Segundo area, in Corpus Christi, also known as Corpus, in Austin, Lubbock, and in several towns in the southern part of Texas. The gang is still making news headlines. For instance, in early 2025, Jesse Martinez and Gabriel Galindo, both longtime TS members, pled guilty on multiple charges in federal court of dealing in multiple kilos of heroin and methamphetamine. The gang is still around and still considered to be a serious security threat, but has lost a lot of its clout from the early days in the 1980s. As previously stated, there were some major lockdowns in prison gangs in TDCJ, in particular between the TS and Mexikanemi during their war. As the TS created enemies, the Mexikanemi was able to recruit them, not just in San Antonio, but throughout the state and in various units. It was not too long before they outnumbered the TS. Assaults between the two gangs continued and climaxed on Labor Day weekend of 1985, when 2 TS members entered a crowded day room in the dairy unit armed with butcher and boning knives from the kitchen and attacked and killed 3 members of the MA. The following day, then Director McCotter ordered a system-wide lockdown until every gang member, suspect, and associate was identified and placed in administrative segregation, also known as the hole. The Mexikanemi Constitution was written by founder and lifetime president Heriberto Herb aka Muelas Huerta, who actually did time with the California Mexican Mafia back in the late 1970s and early 80s. So I beg to differ when some people say there are no connections. When Herb wrote the Texas MA documents, he identifies Rodolfo Cheyenne Cadena, a major figure in the Mexican Mafia who is depicted in the movie American Meat, but there are many errors in that movie. As many of you have seen my Mexican Mafia videos already know. He then went back to Texas and formed the Texas Mexican Mafia. It was set up in a military-style fashion. He then created the Texas Mexican Mafia within the Texas Department of Criminal Justice and was able to gain a lot of soldiers. Herb was then indicted by the feds and housed for many years at the ADX in Florence, Colorado, but is presently housed at the Federal Medical Center in Butner, being 73 years old. His right-hand man and vice president was Benito Old Man Alonzo, who was accused of helping provide guns for Fred Carrasco during his summer of 1974 hostage siege situation within TDCJ as covered in Part 1, as well as Reynaldo Ray Ramirez, who is his voice in the federal BOP gender population. Understand that Ray passed away a few years ago. In July 2020, an individual named David Boteo, aka Torito, aka Bully, aka Bullyman of San Antonio, was busted by the DEA in July 2020. He had previously been arrested by San Antonio police during a traffic stop when officers discovered he was driving without a license. He was then found to be in possession of approximately 150 grams of methamphetamine, 9 new cell phones, and $585. Further investigation revealed that Boteo was conspiring with other members of the Texas Mexican Mafia to deal and distribute large quantities of methamphetamine in the greater San Antonio area. In April 2021, he was charged on 3 counts of a 14-count indictment that included 11 co-defendants. And Boteo was also charged with being a felon in possession of a firearm. He pled guilty in December 2024 to 1 count of conspiracy to distribute and possess with intent to distribute more than 500 grams of methamphetamine. The Mexikanemi still has the impact on the safety and security of staff within the Texas Department of Criminal Justice and out on the street, as well as in the BOP, but does not have as much power as they once had either. I was interviewed by KSAT TV in San Antonio for several episodes about the Texas MA, in case you're interested in seeing those. Los Hermanos de Pistoleros Latinos, or HBL, is a prison gang that was founded during the late 1980s. It operates in many prisons and on the streets, in particular down in South Texas, around Laredo. 2024, 19 people associated with the gang were arrested by San Antonio police in a crackdown. Officials stated that these 19 plus 5 more that had been arrested previously were taken into custody on federal charges. One of those arrested, including Daniel Natividad, highest ranking HBL member out in the free world at the time. 2025, Raul Garcia, aka Rule, pled guilty in federal court to selling heroin packaged for street sales. The Paso and Unida prison gang was first documented by TDCJ in 1991. It has no association with other groups that have Raza or Unida in their name. This gang is based primarily in the Corpus Christi area, or Corpus, with at least 300 members, last I checked. And they're still active in parts of Texas today. El Paso, Texas, also called Chucotown, was at one time a stronghold for the Texas Syndicate, but eventually they burned bridges with many people in town. The Barrio Aztecas organized in 1987 at the Coalfield Unit in TDCJ and quickly moved to the streets. According to gang expert, retired El Paso PD gang sergeant and former El Paso Intelligence Center specialist Mary Lou Carrillo, many of their members are addressed as indios. They're also called flechas, and many of their drawings are very similar to the Mexikanemi because of all the references to Aztec religion and characters. One BA member, Eduardo Tablas Revalo, was considered to be the number one guy down in Juarez, and was said to have at least 50 bodyguards protecting him at all times. He lived in a mansion and often traveled back and forth across the border to discuss business, such as contract killings. At one time, he was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list and worked with the drug cartels down in Chihuahua and Juarez. Tablas was under pressure from a group of enforcers called La Linea, many of them police officers or former police officers who were working for the Juarez cartel. In 2010, Barrio Aztecas were involved in some U.S. consulate member killings, and the death of an El Paso jail detention officer, which brought a lot of unwanted attention on them. A BA named El Beni was the person who supposedly ordered the killings, even though the sicarios or assassins had the wrong targets. Bliss was captured in 2018 and charged in federal court. Just a couple months ago, very recently, he pled guilty to racketeering and conspiracy related to the 2010 U.S. consulate murders in Juarez. El Paso, Texas also has a lot of California sureños, as well as homegrown El Paso sureños. A lot of them came to the city to escape the three strikes law in the 1980s and 90s and hooked up with local sureños and schooled them on the California ways. There's also another group called Tangos, who I'll talk about more here in a minute. And the Choco Tango and Sureños took advantage of the void of all of Barrio's Aztecas that were charged in RICO cases and major law enforcement operations that diminished some of their power on the streets. The Partido Revolucionario Mexicano, also known as Mexicles, operates in both Mexico and Texas. It was founded in 1987 at the Coalfield Unit. Their objective was to unite all incarcerated Mexican nationals, or paisas. Down in Juarez, I know that they have battled the Barrio Aztecas in some very vicious incidents in their institutions. There's also the Texas Chicano Brotherhood and Tri-City Bombers, as well as other gangs in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Tango Blasters, sometimes called Puro Tango Blasters or PTB, were first a loosely organized group of Texas homeboys that were formed in TDCJ prisons and county jails in the 1990s to protect themselves from other prison gangs, or esquinas. In 1998, the Tango Blast group was first documented at the Clemens Unit, and they stated that they were not a prison gang, just a group of guys from the neighborhood. But per their constitution and drawings, it is obvious they're not really that different. Original Tango groups, known as the Four Horsemen, were from four major Texas cities: Houston, D-Town or Dallas, Fort Worth, also known as Foritos, and Austin, Texas, also known as Capirucha. And like I stated, since that time there are other tangos that have sprouted up, like in El Paso, Texas, in the 915 area code. They also sometimes put down 320 for the third letter of the alphabet C, and for the 20th letter of the alphabet T for Chucotown. And at last count, El Paso Sheriff's Office believed that there were about 200 members of the Chucotown Tango. A young Tango Blast group called Los Orejones from San Antonio were first used by the Mexican Mafia as torpedoes. They would even sometimes call them crash test dummies and send them out on missions. But the Orejones soon became in conflict with them as their numbers grew and as they grew tired of the abuse from the Mexikanemi. There are also the Vayucos from South Texas, and I believe some other tangos now. There have been some Tren de Aragua found within the state. I did an interview with Kimberly Yearwood, who is from Collin County Sheriff's Office in Texas, that you can view on this channel if you're interested in learning more about them. There are also some Mexican drug cartels act in Texas who commit violence and supply prison and street gang members with drugs. In return, some of these groups supply the cartels with weapons. These drug trafficking organizations are constantly jockeying for power and money as some of their leaders become captured or killed. I just did a video on the capture of El Mencho from the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, if you are interested. I also did a video on the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas and the Aryan Circle, so I won't get much into those. I assisted Vice with their episode last year on the ABT. As stated in previous videos, the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas is not to be confused with other groups by the same name, active in other states. They started in the early 1980s, were hit with several RICO cases by the feds in recent years, but still have a presence in TDCJ, as well as in the BOP. In 2025, one of their ABT generals on the wheel died almost 10 years after he was convicted at a trial in Tarrant County. James Lamarck Birdman Bird passed just over a year ago at the Alfred D. Hughes unit, according to a report from the Texas Attorney General's office. He was known for having a very large backpack of Adolf Hitler, and while I don't like that image, I got to admit, that's some pretty good ink. Aryan Circle was formed in 1985 by white inmates who were fed up with other groups, like the ABT, who claimed to believe in white supremacy. They spread throughout the Texas Department of Criminal Justice to over a dozen other states, and have a fairly large presence in the federal BOP. In May 2025, AC member Daniel Christopher Allen was given a life sentence for aggravated assault against a police servant after he opened fire on a Plano, Texas SWAT officer while police were executing a narcotics search warrant on August 31st, 2021. I'm not going to go into street gangs any further in this video due to time constraints. Perhaps I'll come back to cover more of them at a later date. I will say that a lot of people ask me about black prison gangs in TDCJ, like the Mandingo Warriors. I do not believe they're in existence anymore. From what I hear, like what happened with the Black Gorilla family in California, most young blacks didn't want to listen to older cons bossing them around, so the old breed are now like dinosaurs. The younger generation in gangs like Crips, Bloods, and Disciples are far more undisciplined and don't want to follow a lot of rules. Even with younger Hispanics, this same mindset is more of a factor today. Thus, the explosive growth of the Tangos, with no clear leadership, very loose organization that attracts a lot of youngsters. It seems that even white prison gangs are also having a hard time getting new quality recruits. For the ones left over, it may be harder to remain in it after years of being in lockdown, but they may still try to control some of the contraband, which is still big business, as shown at the start of Part 1. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice has initiated a process which provides a method for inmates to renounce their gang membership. The procedure is called the Gang Renouncement and Disassociation Process, or GRAD. Inmates who are willing to renounce their affiliation are required to participate in a 9-month program until they graduate. After successfully completing the grad process, they may be released into general population and assigned to a unit as recommended by the State Classification Committee. If an inmate is found to be involved in gang activities after release to general population, the inmate will not be allowed to participate in the grad process again. In order to participate in the program, an inmate must not have been involved in any gang activities for a minimum of 1 year. They must complete and sign a gang member disassociation packet, also known as a debrief, have been assigned to restrictive housing level 1 for the previous 6 months prior to enrollment, and not have received any disciplinary cases for assault, sexual misconduct, weapon possession, etc. Basically, no serious rule violations. I understand that some exceptions may be made, but they have to go through a longer waiting period and be reviewed by the classification committee again on an individual case-by-case basis. As far as the streets, the governor's office and the Texas Department of Public Safety in a 2026 Homeland Security Strategic Plan stated that by the year 2030, Texas will likely have 33.5 million people, representing a population growth of approximately 7% from the current level. The report also projected the vast majority of this growth would occur in metropolitan counties, with many rural areas continuing to lose population. So one can only assume that gangs will likely increase activity on the streets of urban areas due to this growth. And with the release of more gang members from prison that do not go through the GRAD program and do not rehabilitate. So Texas citizens, Tejanos, should be aware of what is out there in and inside of their prison facilities. Some of the information in this video is included in a book written by my brother and former Colorado gang investigator Lieutenant Steve Rucero that is called From Carnelismo to Chaos, Chicano Gangs and History of the Southwest U.S. Before I end, I'd like to give a shout out to all the great past and present gang investigators from the Lone Star State, many who remain my friends. I'd also like to give props to the Texas Anti-Gang Center, or TAG, the El Paso Intelligence Center, EPIC, and the Texas Gang Investigators Association for helping keeping our streets safe. TGIA is having their annual training in San Antonio, Texas, 2026. You must be law enforcement in order to attend. The International Latino Gang Investigators Association is also sponsoring several upcoming seminars this year, including one in Texas, one in Nebraska, and one in Northern California. And I highly encourage all officers to attend any of those great trainings as well. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.